Well, tonight on our Wednesday feature, it's going green. Dr. Philippa Notten of the Greenhouse has been working with the Worldwide Fund for Nature, WWF, during the month of October to highlight some of the issues around plastic pollution and how we can turn this problem around. Dr. Philippa Notten joins us now for more on discussion from our Seapoint studio in Cape Town. Very good evening to you, Doctor. We thank you very much for your time. Essentially, this thing of recycling and having to reuse plastic and having to make note of where one puts it in recycling, it's not something new. Just take us where plastic actually came from.
Well, I think it feels like we've had plastic always. I mean, it's so much a part of our lives and certain of our convenient modern lives. It's hard to imagine a life without plastic, but it's actually only been since the 1950s actually that plastic started being mass produced. And it's just interesting to see how meteoric its rise has been, because it's just such a versatile and material that we can make into so many different things, and it's so useful and that it's just grown and grown, and it's where we are today. I think it's hard to imagine life, but it actually hasn't been that long. And then it's interesting to see when you look at the graphs of plastic rise, and it's the reason that we're sitting here now with all this plastic pollution is that all the plastic that we've made since the 1950s essentially is still hanging around on our planet, with only 9% of plastic has been recycled, 14% incinerated since the very beginning of plastic being made. You can imagine how much that is now. That's just slowly accumulating around in landfills, but also in our environment, and that is where we've been seeing it more and more, and it's becoming more and more of a headline environmental issue, this plastic that's accumulating in our environment, and especially in the oceans.
Yeah, definitely. Let's talk a bit more about that as it finds its way into the environment. Let's talk about the impacts that it has on our marine life. More often than not, we see whales washed up, we see fish washed up, and when they are dissected or when biopsies have been conducted, we see that there's huge amounts of plastics that our marine life and mammals have consumed.
Yes. So it has two major sort of physical impacts. One is it's just entanglement. So we see a lot of entanglement, ropes, plastic bags that can get caught physically around animals, and that's the cause of a lot of fatalities. And then also, as you say, the eating, the little pieces. So as plastic gets into the marine environment, it breaks down into small pieces, and birds mistake that for food and eat it, and then fish and turtles. And then increasingly more worrying has been the very tiny pieces of plastic that we call microplastics. So as plastics break down into these ever smaller particles, the filter feeders in the ocean are eat it, because ingested as it comes in, and then the fish that eat the filter feeders, and so on up the food chain. And there's concerns now, of course, that we eat the seafood that's eaten the plastic. So essentially we're eating the plastic. So the ingestion impact is also another one. So it is both the sort of the entanglement and also the eating the plastics. And then the third impact is around the toxicity of chemicals that are both in the plastics, and then potentially also, it's called absorbing onto the surface of those tiny plastic particles. So any pollutants that may have been in the environment, in the sea, actually can preferentially go into that plastic, absorb onto the surface of the plastic, and then that's getting eaten by the bird life and the fish and the marine life, and then ultimately potentially also ourselves eating the seafood. So the chemical impact or toxicity impact is an emerging and worrying another impact. And then another impact on marine wildlife is actually also called rafting, where it transports organisms around the sea, as it sounds, little float literally on these plastic particles vast distances across the ocean, and that's also another impact. So all in all, more than 800 species have been known to be affected through these various mechanisms. So the big ones that we see, the turtles and the whales, but really it's very widespread across a range of species, from the very tiny zooplankton all the way up to the whales.
And as we move away from the health, let's just discuss single plastics. What's the problem with this? Why is it such a huge issue? And what essentially does single plastic use mean?
So single-use plastics, it's become a sort of a an easy to use term, essentially just to highlight the fact that so many of the plastic products that we use, really we use just for a single use or just a very short life. So it's sort of singling out those very short-lived products. Straws, bottles that we drink the cool drink and then we throw out the bottle. So things that we use for a couple of minutes then hang around for decades or centuries in our environment. So it's really to sort of this term single use has come up. It doesn't mean that, you know, some of those products like a bag may well have a second use, but it's sort of highlighting those short-lived products that are the key concern, because those are also the ones that we find a lot when you do the beach cleanups. It's 77% of the plastics that we find are actually these short-lived single-use plastics. And then of course the very big single-use plastic is packaging. It also has such a short life. It serves its purpose and then is discarded.
Essentially, how would you...
why the term single uses.
Yeah, essentially, how would you describe South Africans' attitude towards recycling plastic, towards making sure that you throw paper cups into a bin that is just for paper, or plastic that's just for paper? Is that something that South Africans have adopted? Is it something that we're teaching our children in schools?
I certainly see great hope in now teaching our children, and certainly for my children I think they are more aware than certainly many adults, because there is a lot of focus on environment and plastic in our schools, and great education campaigns. For us as consumers, I think it is still quite hard, even though a lot of people would like to recycle. It's not always easy. It isn't. There's not that many that have curbside, where you can separate your recyclables and it gets collected separately from the municipality. There are a few places that do that, but really it's still the minority. So you have to be quite keen to be a recycler, and you have to know where to take your plastic. You have to know how to separate it out. So I think the keenness is often there, but the sort of the logistics lag a bit behind.
Thank you very much for your time this evening, Dr. Philippa Notten from our Seapoint studio in Cape Town on plastic pollution on Going Green.